Welcome back, America. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is always welcome on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Good morning, Governor. Welcome back.
Great to be back, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
I want to play for you a brief excerpt from an interview former President Trump did with Sean Hannity 2 nights ago that did not get much attention, but I heard it, and I want your reaction to it. Here it is.
But ultimately, he's going to take over all of Ukraine.
He was talking about Putin, and let's play it again so everyone understands. The president was asked about Putin and Ukraine, and he said this.
But ultimately, he's going to take over all of Ukraine.
What do you think of that, Chris Christie?
I think it's awful, but I think it's exactly what you can expect from someone who, has shown a liking for authoritarianism, from someone who has said before that he admires Putin. And I just think it's also a defeatism that, we should permit this type of aggression to occur in this world and that it doesn't have other ramifications. The follow-up question should have been, well, if that's the case, then what is President Xi going to think about American intentions to help Taiwan defend itself? What will the Iranians think about America's intentions to help Israel protect itself? What will the North Koreans think about America's intentions to help South Korea defend itself? That's the signal sending that's happening here. And it's a lack of recognition that this is also a proxy war by China by supporting Russia economically and militarily in this aggression against Ukraine to try to show our allies around the world that we're not a reliable ally any longer.
What does Chris Christie think about American policy in aiding Ukraine?
Look, I think we should have done more earlier. We should have done more, certainly, during the Obama administration. That was an absolute disgrace that Barack Obama would not send any lethal aid to the Ukrainians to help defend themselves all the way back then. And that the Trump administration was better on it, but still not as aggressive as they should have been. And certainly the Biden administration not only didn't deter Putin, but they sent a signal to Putin early on that aggression would be okay when President Biden said, well, a small incursion probably wouldn't be a problem. People listen to what the American president says and does, and they act accordingly. And that's why we need a president who will be very deliberate and smart about what comes out of their mouth. And the clip you just played from Donald Trump with Sean Hannity doesn't fit either of those criteria.
Do you think there is a split in the Republican Party over aid to Ukraine?
I think there is an argument in the party about it, absolutely. And I think you just need to listen to people like Donald Trump or like Governor DeSantis. And, I'm not sure exactly what side he's on at this point, but, there's certainly mixed signals being sent. And when that happens, you empower authoritarian aggressors.
All right, I'm going to come back to politics in a moment, Governor, and particularly former President Trump's speech in Waco. But a quick question about guns. You dealt with guns and gun violence. This is the aftermath of a horrific shooting. The manifesto has not been released. Is there any legitimate law enforcement reason still for the manifesto not to have been released?
Not that I can think of, especially given the fact that the perpetrator is dead. The only possible explanation is if there's some conspiracy, if for some reason this person did not act alone. There's no indication in what we know publicly yet about that. But that's the only potential excuse, although I don't see anything in what we've read already that would indicate that's the case.
If it lingers and it's not disclosed today or tomorrow, what do you think is the explanation for that?
Well, I would think that there are folks who don't like whatever is said in that manifesto doesn't fit their particular point of view, and they're trying to keep it quiet because it doesn't fit, the mainstream media's explanation for these type of events.
All right, the next question has to do with the Silicon Valley Bank, which I believe is growing as an issue. I think it was a bailout of protected people. I think it was an absolute gift to Silicon Valley elites. What do you think about it?
Yeah, look, I think moral hazard is real, Hugh. I think that when folks put more than the FDIC limit in a particular bank, they need to know that money is at risk. And not only do the depositors need to know that, but so do the managers of the bank. And I think that the Silicon Valley Bank bailout, was not right, shouldn't have been done. And it's just another mistake by the Biden administration's Fed and that administration with Janet Yellen at Treasury that helps the people who help them.
Now, there was a notable shift in Fox polling on the presidential race. And as of yesterday, in polling taken between March 24th and March 27th, Donald Trump, among Republicans, leads with 54%. Ron DeSantis a distant second with 24%. Then you fall off to Mike Pence with 6%, and everybody else. A, how much credibility do you put into that? And B, is the former president benefiting from, again, the renewal of resentment against elites drove this election in 2016. I think it's coming back. What do you think about both of those questions, the poll and the renewal?
Well, look, on the poll, you can. I think polling these days, as you know, becomes more and more difficult and less reliable because of the way polls are conducted. And so I don't. And in terms of the impact of that on the race itself, I don't give it a whole lot of credence. But let's assume, for the sake of your question, Hugh, that the poll is accurate. I think there's two things that Donald Trump are benefiting from right now. One is the one you mentioned, which is, backlash from the Silicon Valley Bank issue. But I think, the second one is backlash to the actions of the Manhattan DA. I think the anticipation of an indictment in Manhattan where crime is running rampant, violent crime is running rampant, and it's people's idea that somehow how does that help the quality of life of the people in New York to be chasing a 7-year-old payment to a porn star?
I agree with that. Now, I want to go to a submarine issue. It's everywhere discussed and not frequently debated, and that is, what do we do about children who identify as the opposite gender? There's a headline in the New York Times today. GOP lawmakers override Kentucky governor's veto on anti-trans laws. First of all, they're not anti-trans laws. They're the legislature's view of what is appropriate medical treatment, but they are being portrayed as that. How do you deal with this issue when you were asked about it in appearances such as you made in New Hampshire over the weekend?
Well, I wasn't asked about it, but what I will say to you is that I don't think it is the government's business, first and foremost, to be getting in between parents and their children on how to discuss sexuality. And so trans is just one of those issues, Hugh. But the first thing is that I think there is growing resentment in this country that the education establishment believes that it is not only better, but is entitled to be getting in between parents and their children on the teaching and the morality of what we show our children regarding sexuality. And I think, look, I've seen this issue up close, Hugh. I've had folks in my orbit who have dealt with this issue. And I don't think there are parents who wouldn't be enormously concerned about a child who feels this way and wanting to help that child in whatever way they felt was appropriate. And my view is the parents should be making these decisions, not bureaucrats in the school system.
And I do believe there is a legitimate argument that the medical community is running away from controversy by encouraging these, especially irreversible surgeries. And I think puberty blockers are increasingly, obviously, in Britain, dangerous. Is this something you expect to be an issue in the 2024 campaign?
Look, I think the overall issue will be, and how you answer it and is going to say a lot about how you feel about parental rights and how you feel about how aggressive government is allowed to be in people's personal lives. I think it's a liberty issue.
Now, that liberty issue, of course, raises a lot. Do people have the right to do things that demonstrably might injure children down the road, or can we just wait? We'll come back to that. I want to go back to Donald Trump. How did you assess his Waco speech?
I thought it was a snoozer. I think the act is getting very old. And I think that no leader who is backward-looking is a leader who can be victorious. And I'm tired of hearing about his grievances. And I said this in New Hampshire on Monday. You know, when he says, "I am your retribution," no, thank you. No, thank you. You know, the only retribution he will be is his own retribution. He cares about himself first and foremost and exclusively. And that speech in Waco proves exactly that.
You've been his friend a long time. Are you still his friend?
I don't think we're friends any longer, no. I haven't spoken to him, Hugh, since December of 2020.
All right. Talk to me a little bit about the January 6th meme, which is developing that there are political prisoners in the United States. I do not believe that. I do not believe there is a single political prisoner in the United States. Sometimes you draw a tough prosecutor, sometimes you draw an easy prosecutor, but we do not do political prosecutions. What do you think?
Anyone who was involved in the January 6th riot on Capitol Hill needs to have their particular conduct evaluated by law enforcement, and if charges are brought, are entitled to a jury of their peers to make that evaluation. And that's exactly what happens in this country. It's what is happening. And the idea that somehow this is a political action is just, to me, wrong. Now, as you said, I've been a prosecutor for 7 years at the highest levels, and prosecutors have to make good, responsible judgments, and we need to evaluate them on those judgments. But the idea somehow that this is a group of people who are praiseworthy, who were participating in the violence, it doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Is there a current in the present Republican Party that is attempting to legitimize anything to do with the January 6th riot, which I would reject? And I just want to hear what you think about that.
Well, I think Donald Trump's trying to do that. And I think that the more oxygen he's given on this issue, the more he tries to mainstream his particular point of view. But what I want your listeners to understand is that's not motivated by his concern for those people. It is motivated by his concern for himself and wanting to minimize what his lack of action on January 6th helped to contribute to. And It's all selfish, Hugh. It is not in any way meant to try to help anyone but himself. And it's this party of me versus party of us I've been talking about. We need to either get back to being a party of us, where we work for all the American people, and not have every policy decision, every political endorsement run through just one prism only, which is it good for Donald Trump or not? Because that's the way he's making these judgments, and it is awful for our party and worse for our country.
I want to close by the conversation you had with voters in New Hampshire, in which you intimated you would be his nemesis on a debate stage. That indicates that you're thinking about getting onto the debate stage. What did you unpack that for us? What do you mean you would do to Donald Trump what you did to Marco Rubio?
Well, what I said, Hugh, in New Hampshire was that we need to have someone on the stage who's going to challenge the president frontally, directly. What I'm concerned about as I watch the current field that develops is everybody tries to, at best, do sideswipe evaluations. Doesn't want to take him on directly. Afraid maybe to take him on directly. Whether that fear is political or personal, I don't know. But what I was saying to people in New Hampshire is, if you want to try to move the party forward into a future-looking direction, Donald Trump is addicted to the attention the presidency gave him. And he will do anything he can to get that attention back. And that kind of person's not going to walk away voluntarily. So he needs to be taken on frontally and directly for the ways that he let us down as president. And there were ways, significant ways in my view, that he did, and that he has let us down in his post-presidency after having the privilege of the greatest honor that the American people can give to one of their fellow citizens. That's a failure, and to me, a disqualifying failure, which merits people going at him directly. And all I was saying to people is, if I decide to get into the race, I will not shrink from that challenge, and I won't try to play cute with it, because playing cute with it, I think, will lead to a bad result.
Now, I want to also talk about going directly at Joe Biden. I believe he is infirm, and the response to the Nashville shooting, where he came down and did 4 minutes of stand-up after telling the networks to break in, is just the most obvious and cringeworthy evidence of that. What do you think about the president's capacity to govern right now?
I've been saying from the time he was elected that I thought his capacity to govern was compromised. And I think that, I was on right after he made those comments. I was on TV and said it was one of the most pathetic performances I've ever seen by someone in public life. And it's sad. It's sad for the American people. But worse yet, it's dangerous, Hugh. It's dangerous because we don't know who is really in charge from day to day and moment to moment. And for a president to come out there after that kind of tragedy and to make jokes about being Dr. Jill Biden's husband and looking for chocolate chip ice cream, listen, that's why the stakes are so high in the presidential race, Hugh, because the Democrats are going to renominate this guy. All evidence to the contrary notwithstanding, they're going to renominate him for another 4 years. And so we cannot have this be a backward-looking 2020 replay. And I absolutely believe that that's what the stakes are in our nomination process. When you look at Joe Biden, realize that that's what we could, in fact, be in store for through 2028. And how will that serve the American people? How will that serve our allies around the world? How will that serve our children's futures?
All right, last question, Governor. New Hampshire is going to have the key primary, unless Chris Sununu's in it, in which case it's devalued. South Carolina is going to have Nikki Haley and maybe Tim Scott in it. That's going to be devalued. Florida is going to have Governor DeSantis in it. That's going to be devalued. Does Iowa carry enough weight to decide this for the Republican Party? Because honestly, I don't know until Super Tuesday how we get a result.
Look, I think that's one of the issues, and we're not going to know the answer to that question, Hugh, until we see who the entire field is. Because you're right, it's very candidate dependent on all of that, and I think that's why you see many folks like myself examining this, looking at it, because if you're going to make a decision to run, you want that decision to be a smart one and one that helps give you a path to victory. No one should be running for president for pyrrhic reasons, Hugh. You should be running for president because you see a path to winning and a way to contribute to the country by becoming president. So we're going to have to see how all this develops. But you're right. A lot of these early primary states are devalued, and maybe it's Iowa and Nevada that wind up becoming very important, depending upon who's in the contest.
Okay, very last question, Governor. Vivek Ramaswamy and Larry Elder are both declaring for president. Neither of them have won anything. Larry's lost something. What's your advice to the RNC about candidates who have not won elections before and the debate stage? Because that's not my call to make. If I do a debate, it's by other people's rules. But what about getting onto that stage?
Look, I think we need to have a robust argument and discussion. You and I have talked about this before. If we're up to me and you, we'd be having debates already.
Yes.
And I think we need to have that discussion. And I think the criteria, whatever criteria they set up, have to be sure that they're not, overly exclusionary, Hugh. I don't think that we should have professional politicians culling the field too significantly until voters do. And so it's got to be a very careful way of looking at that and doing it. And so I would be reluctant to have there be too many criteria that would make it very difficult for even folks who have won elections before to get on that stage.
Governor Chris Christie, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you. Keep coming back, and I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you, Governor.
Thanks for having me, Hugh.